Hello everyone and welcome to Understanding the 2025 Microsoft Vulnerability Landscape. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing the findings of the BeyondTrust 2025 Microsoft Vulnerabilities Report to understand what it tells us about the Microsoft vulnerability landscape, what that means for your security strategy, and we'll be diving into this with the help of our expert panel. I'm James Maude, Field CTO, co-host of the Adventures of Alice and Bob podcast, and your moderator for today's discussion. Now, for those not familiar with the report, it's an annual analysis of all the Patch Tuesday security bulletins released by Microsoft over the course of the previous year. So we'll be looking at the data from 2024 in this year's session. And the aim of it is to provide insights into the overall number of vulnerabilities, the severity of them, the types of vulnerabilities, and the trends across different Microsoft product areas. It also pulls out and highlights significant vulnerabilities to uncover key challenges, novel attack vectors, and really the interesting side of the general vulnerabilities landscape. It's now in its 12th year, and it's helping to chart those historic trends over that period of time, giving insights into the challenges and the direction of the Microsoft vulnerability, as well as the overall threat landscape. Now, some facts from this year's report. It's covered a record-breaking 1,360 vulnerabilities overall, with remote code execution and elevation of privilege continuing to be the dominant vulnerability categories. We've seen movement from the relative newcomer category of security feature bypasses. That's been trending upwards with a 60% year-on-year increase. We've seen the Windows operating system also see increases in vulnerabilities, although they're still remaining well below the levels peaked to in 2020. Critical vulnerabilities, those yardsticks of the amount of panic among IT administrators out there, have continued to slowly decrease, but maybe not quite at the rate we were hoping. So what does this all mean? What should you take away from this report? Should you be worried? Should you be happy? To find answers to these questions out, let's introduce our expert panel who are going to guide us through the data and answer those very questions. In no particular order, let's start off with Paula. Today, I'm delighted to be introducing Paula Januszkiewicz, a vulnerability report veteran and the founder and CEO of Secure and Secure Academy. As an enterprise security MVP and honorable Microsoft regional director, she's truly an expert voice in this area and is usually so busy traveling the world helping clients that we don't often get the time we want with Paula. So Paula, thank you for joining us today.
This is a perfect introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me as well. Pleasure.
No problem at all. It looks like you're in a classroom. Are you on the road today as well?
Yes, all together with Sami. Soon.
Fantastic. Well, as you're on the road with Sami, let's introduce him next. Next up, we have the legendary Sami Laiho, a Windows security MVP and one of the world's leading experts in the Windows OS. Starting his career as a järjestelmänvalvoja, or in English a sysadmin, in his native Finland, Sami's now known as a global cybersecurity expert, award-winning presenter who seamlessly blends education and entertainment, teaching you 45 life hacks in Windows in 45 minutes, introducing the world to the admin finger, and creating WinFu, the only martial arts in Windows. Sami, are you looking forward to doing some training with Paula this week?
I am. This is actually super hilarious that we are actually in the same city, although I have absolutely no idea where Paula is, but we are in the same city.
Fantastic. The brain power in that city is vastly increased because of it. We're also joined today by Kip Boyle from Cyber Risk Opportunities, who serves as Chief Information Security Officer for several companies and co-hosts the excellent Cyber Risk Management podcast, which breaks down cyber risks in plain English without jargon and scaremongering. And having served as a captain in the US Air Force F-22 program, Kip really knows a thing or two about managing risks. So Kip, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, James. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the work y'all are doing.
Thank you. And thank you for your first commentary on the report this year. That's really gratefully received that.
Yeah, you're quite welcome.
And last but not least, our final expert is Charles Henderson, VP of Cybersecurity Services at Coalfire. And as an experienced executive, Charles has worked across a range of cyber disciplines and a range of companies, everyone from governments and large Fortune 500 companies right down to small and mid-sized companies, helping improve their security posture and helping them respond to cybersecurity incidents. He's also an enthusiastic member of the security and vulnerability research community, serving on the Black Hat Review Board and speaking at major security conferences around the globe. So thanks for joining us today, Charles.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So without further ado, let's jump right into what our experts are taking away from the report this year. And Kip, let's start off with you. Are there any key takeaways that you've seen in the report this year that caught your eye?
Yeah, there is. Actually, the elevation of privilege vulnerabilities just popped right out at me. And I think one of the reasons for that, more than anything else, is we've been helping our customers kind of navigate the gauntlet of cyber insurance, either applications or renewals. And it was really interesting recently. One thing that popped up, and it kind of felt like it came out of nowhere, but we had somebody who was applying for insurance, and they had something like, and they were a medium-sized company. They had something like 60 privileged service accounts in their on-prem environment. And we wrote that down. It was one of the questions. And they got denied for coverage. And so I thought, okay, but without explanation. So I went and I spoke with one of the underwriters and I said, what gives? Tell me what's going on. And they said, well, with more than one or two privileged service accounts, we're just not going to write this policy. And I was kind of like, well, what? Because I've never seen this on a, top 18 or whatever. I'd never seen this before being brought up. And so they said, yeah, well, all the data we have on ransomware attacks that have succeeded shows that escalation of privilege is a common thread in all of them, especially the service accounts, because no human beings are paying them any mind. And so when I looked at the BeyondTrust report for this year and I saw, how much elevation of privilege, how prominent it is in here, I thought, okay, well, I guess the insurance people know what they're doing, at least on this note.
I mean, I see Paul and Sami smiling along, and maybe Sami, how many environments have you worked in where they would love to have only 60 privileged service accounts in their environment?
Yeah, I see them all over, and it is one of the biggest problems still to date. Everyone is, I've been talking about getting rid of excessive privileges for 23 years now. And every time it's the same conversation, someone comes to me and says, you're still not talking about getting rid of those excessive privileges. And I'm asking the audience, is this not a problem anymore? So it seems to be the same issue all the time.
Absolutely. And I think what we've actually seen in the trends in the report is, as our kind of industry has matured and people have started to get a grasp on that, regulatory compliance reasons, various other reasons that people have started deploying PAM solutions, actually we've seen the elevation of privilege rise up and up because attackers are looking for novel ways to elevate their privilege within those environments if maybe everyone isn't actually running with local admin anymore. Although these things still happen, but as we've seen the privileges assigned to users get more under control, the attackers are looking for those service accounts, those non-human identities, and those elevation of privilege paths. Kip, is that a trend that you've seen in your practice?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think it's reasonable to ask, well, why? Why are these accounts, why is this elevation of privilege so attractive for attackers? And I can tell you one of the things I've seen is it's just a golden ticket to give them everything that they want. It allows them to distribute their malware absolutely unhindered. They can lower your defenses and then use your own software distribution processes to push the malware out. So if it were me, I would want this too, right? Because it just makes everything easier for the attacker.
Yeah, and it totally explains why, we always see remote code execution and elevation of privilege as these two big categories that dominate the report every year, because those are the things that people want. You want your code to run, and you want it to run with privileges if you're trying to attack an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Paula, over to you. What are the things that you took away from this year's report?
Well, first of all, I would say that if we're looking into the privilege access thing, some of the companies, they kind of learn by the incidents how to do it, let's say, properly. But then there are new ones popping up, and there are different applications and different solutions that they bring and so on. So it's kind of like a vicious circle of various activities that companies perform eventually within their environments. And when we look into for example, the browser vulnerabilities, then it's good to see that, for example, from the Microsoft Edge perspective, only 9 were critical, but then there was still quite a lot. So that also means that the researchers' world that got more intense, and let me look at it maybe also from the other angle perspective, because we could be saying that it's of course a lot, but on the other angle, maybe it's a lot because also the research of the vulnerabilities gets actually its AI support right now, and we're leveraging the AI platforms to do things faster for us. So eventually we're learning more and we get more in time. So it's just heading to the better times. So the more of that we will be able to find, the more secure eventually we're going to be. And I've been actually in South Korea not really long time ago on the exploiters conference, where you can actually see people that do that for the living. And that kind of a discovery that they do, it's not as manual as it used to be. So technically, we could have things that were vulnerable in the same way, but we just knew less because eventually we had less tools, less time, less people doing that, and so on. It was less of a trend. So eventually, that might be actually a breakthrough year, where we have a lot of vulnerabilities that are there, and then there's going to be a fixing process, hopefully later. But maybe next year, when we're going to be using the same automated tools, or maybe they're going to be even more and better tools, that's going to shift. So I'm actually wondering in numbers how that's going to end up for the next year too. So that we can compare the breakthrough years. Well, AI started to be the one that was used to speed up the research, and also during the 2025, it got better. So what's the result of that? So kind of at that angle that I get.
Yeah, and you mentioned like we've seen the increases in Edge. Now, Edge was an interesting one because obviously in the early days of this report, it was Internet Explorer and it dominated, and more holes than Swiss cheese and all these challenges that we faced out there with that. And then we saw Edge come along, and that had a lot of challenges. And then they rebased to the Chromium kind of base for the Edge thing. We've seen a lot fewer vulnerabilities, but actually those impact so many browsers now that if a critical vulnerability is found, it often impacts Chrome, it impacts Edge. What are your thoughts around that kind of concentration around those, the Chromium engine and that sole focus of those products?
Actually, good that you ask about that, because eventually also during these kind of events, Chromium in general is like a number one thing that's discussed. So there are, of course, different programs that are for submitting vulnerabilities around that. But also, this is our world window. Yeah. So anything that users will click and so on first get there. That, of course, and that is why that is becoming a natural choice of the attackers and the researchers to actually focus on the browser. Yeah. So that eventually we want to have a situation that when the attacker is going to click on something, the user is going to click on something, then it's supposed to immediately be exploitable. Yeah. So, and the focus for that actually, I think, also comes from the other angle, because when we talk about the properly, there is probably not such a thing, but let's say properly secured organization, wink. Yeah. Then, yes. Then basically, we talk about solutions like, blocking the applications that we don't know. That's also the Sami's subject. Yeah, making sure that we are managing the privileged access and all these things. So companies are getting there, and even though they don't have a whole thing, they got one piece here, one piece there, and so on. So it's getting definitely more and more difficult for phishing campaign to be successful, because you're just not getting there. And then you have to spend more time to actually grow and develop a good phishing campaign even for the red teaming projects. So then the focus is pushed towards Chromium, for example, so that could be actually a one-timer, one momentum, where the user clicks on something and then basically you get there. So that path of entry is just shorter. It has a higher difficulty here to enter it, but then eventually the execution, once you are there, it's right away, you are in the infrastructure, and then you can connect the dots, and that's already way, way easier than actually to try things from the external perspective. So that's why we see more of that, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, so it's a very interesting double-edged sword that there's more concentration, more eyes on it. So in theory, there's more security by design, but then at the same time, if there is a vulnerability, it impacts more people. Over to you, Charles. What have you taken away from this year's report?
First of all, I think it bears mentioning, we heard brief mention of RCE, remote code execution, of course, elevation of privilege. I think I'd add another 3-letter abbreviation to the list, which is ROI. The attackers are incredibly focused on return on investment. And that's when you see really a focus by threat actors, by, whoever the attacker is, even by vulnerability researchers, by red teamers, by testers on vulnerabilities that are going to move the needle in their pursuit. So, as looking at it as I do, like an attacker, and saying, how do I see the environment? How do I see my attack chain? I'm looking for vulnerabilities that are going to have the highest impact in elevation as quickly as possible, because every action that you take in the progression of lateral movement and everything is just another chance for the detection and response capabilities to actually work. Okay. So, if you can distill it down to one or two vulnerabilities that you actually have to use, and the rest is just normal use, bingo, that's great. And even taking a step back and saying, what about the vulnerabilities that are not being, or the points of access that are not being used? Why break in when I can just log in, because there's so many credentials floating around via access brokers and everybody else? It becomes just, to that point, fair use according to the detection response capabilities. I mean, it's really a paradigm shift. And, everyone's making this big deal about AI coming on, and it's going to be the savior for our detection and response capabilities. And I'm not so sure I'm that bullish on it right now. Not that I'm anti-AI, but that I'm looking at this and saying we've actually developed this intrinsically horrible security problem just because we have all these accounts, all these credentials, all these shared access that we just haven't done basic hygiene. We're like I think about it like a middle-aged person who has all these health problems going to the doctor and being the doctor's worst nightmare. That's the state of security today. And I look at this report and I think that it's really distilled that down in sort of plain numbers.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that shift towards the identity as a new perimeter identity security. And there's things that, like Sami's been talking for over 20 years about the principle of least privilege. And we've I feel like we got somewhere with people in the Windows environment and endpoints. And then suddenly everyone raced to the cloud and seemed to forget all of these rules still apply in these systems. And suddenly people have all these paths to become a global administrator in Azure or have access to everything in AWS. And suddenly we're thinking, oh, this is a cloud problem. But actually there's a lot of those, maybe instead of, that race to detect things and respond to things, actually there's a lot of those proactive controls that we're maybe running before we can walk there.
We moved to the cloud and all our problems followed us.
This is like one of those horror movies that has like 8 sequels and it's the same plot in all of them, but we pretend like it's a new movie.
Yes, absolutely. IoT devices, right? Everyone, these new IoT devices are out. And we're going, well, default credentials, unpatched systems. Why is this new? They're just connected to the internet. You
mean static credentials are a bad idea? Who could have seen that one coming?
Yeah, exactly. And even recently in the news, there was, a major network vendor who had a problem where their cloud deployments generated default static credentials. The attackers could compromise one, they could compromise them all. Anyway, learning the lessons from the past. Sami, you've got some lessons to learn there. So what did you take away from this year's report? What jumped out to you?
Well, first of all, I would go back to the excessive admin privileges or gaining admin privileges. As when we started to have the ransomware issue, and particularly talking about encryption, now removal of admin rights, for example, that cannot kill the basic function of ransomware when it comes to encryption. The only way to kill ransomware would be change everyone's My Documents to read-only. That's a very nice, very productive solution. So as long as you have write permissions to somewhere, you can encrypt. So we have this issue in bigger networks still where, of course, they have excessive write privileges to shares that they don't even need to write to. So even by removing admin rights, we still have this issue of encryption itself. But really none of the techniques that they want to use for escalating from a single host attack to a company-wide attack. That's where they really need those admin rights for running any kind of attack code. If we can see from the numbers that this is what they want to be able to get good ROI, as mentioned, we shouldn't give it to them. That's relatively simple. And we can see it from this. They want it, they need it, they're going after it. Sadly, of course, succeeding a lot as well. But I mean, many of the tools, they just simply don't work. And I try to explain this to everyone. It's like every operating system we know is based on the assumption that if you log in as root, there are no security guarantees. You have full ownership and full access to the system that you're using. But for Windows, it seems to be a lot more difficult for people. And of course, I could take this way back to developers not developing with limited access, as they're supposed to test everything with limited access. Microsoft has really good documentation on how to build actually supported desktop applications for Windows. If devs would read that, I would be really happy. So we can, of course, take this back long time, and we can take this back to the kind of root cause. But still, I mean, if the attacker attacks, like my company was attacked, untargeted, because of dealing with the neighboring country that we happen to live next to, and our company was targeted. They got into a single computer. They can't get anywhere, basically, because we only allow access from privileged access workstations. So they got a machine, they got in, and I can see from the logs that they try shoot everywhere they can, but they can't get anywhere, and then they just encrypt the one machine and gave up. But that's not what they're after, because now they need to move to an easier target. There's so many apples to pick. I mean, you don't have to choose a single customer if it's difficult. As said, good ROI. So if it doesn't work here, let's take the next one. Like many people ask me as well, is cloud more secure than on-prem? I don't think it's a really relative question now, because the issue currently is that as long as you have easy to hack and easy lateral movement capable on-prem, why would you attack the more difficult cloud one? Because there's easier things to hack. So they as I try to explain to everyone, that you should understand they're criminals. They choose the path of least resistance, so they will go after that. And currently, nothing's easier than going against Active Directory, because then you can do that, like Kip mentioned, get enough access, deploy a group policy to every machine, disable Defender, and just encrypt everything. And then you can ask for real money. They can't ask me for real money for a single computer that didn't really affect our operations at all.
I think administrators and developers and criminals are a lot alike in the fact that they all take the path of least resistance.
It's humanity, man.
and so we so often say attackers take the path of least resistance. How about we just rename it and say humans take the path of least resistance?
Very well put.
And
yeah.
And the path of least resistance is this massive, spaghetti interchange on the highway system where everyone dumps together. And right now, I think the path of least resistance is giving attackers the advantage.
Charles, in my work, when I talk with senior decision makers, they use a slightly different term, the easy button, right? They're always trying to hit the easy button and make the cybersecurity stuff go away. And I'm like, guys, there's no easy button. The things you think are the easy button aren't helping you at all.
But isn't this a little bit the same as like everyone makes the same mistakes with the cloud as we did with on-prem? I mean, people just think that that's the easy button. Because I always tell everyone that you have the same concepts. The buttons might be in different places. Why do I suddenly have customers that have 400 global admins, although they only now had 8 domain admins, for example? Like, how did this happen? We spent 25 years in taking care of basic hygiene, and then you get the cloud, secure by default. No worries here. It's like all the same mistakes again.
That's a marketing problem. That isn't a security problem.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. So it's a matter of understanding. So you introduce something new, but then you don't have a principle of what we are actually doing. And then why wouldn't you actually make another mistake? Even though when we logically think about that, that's just like a not very natural direction and choice here. Actually, we've got the customer, and I was directly answering to an incident where there was a domain admin. In short words, he was like supporting someone on a forum. Someone dropped him a link, like, hey, have a look, good stuff over there. He downloaded that. He fired that setup.msi as a domain admin on his own computer. That was a credential stealer. And eventually there was like over 100 credentials of domain admin that leaked to the cloud. But the fun part is that the hackers didn't really realize that they are domain admins and what they've got, because it was just a silly credential stealer. But then, while of course the global admin data got to the cloud, they definitely tried that. And why they logged in, even though it's supposed to be more secure, because his account was exempted from the MFA rules, because MFA is for users, right?
Yeah. Rules for thee, not for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we couldn't believe, and that was, by the way, one of the reasons why they were completely smashed. Well, major reasons, major starting point why they were smashed, and their cloud was taken over, and then basically it had to be recovered and all the path that you know. So eventually, it's a new themes that are introduced to the field, like cloud, but not only that. And for them, it's like a new environment, new rules, and different knowledge. That hygiene isn't like rooted. It's more like the hygiene is there. Okay, I learned that, but then I'm like, I don't know what's there, and then I'm gonna do what I want. So I think what's necessary here, it's like, but I don't know how to do that yet. Maybe you got some ideas to share, like to build an umbrella where there could be some authority in some sense that could pass that basic principle knowledge to everybody dealing with serious stuff, so that they treat that data, their systems, with the appropriate level of seriousness, but maintaining the appropriate level of hygiene. And if you don't have that level of hygiene certified by maybe XYZ, then sorry, you're not touching my systems.
That was an insane situation. I can tell you that if I go to any school district, and I can do this globally, I would say any school district that I go into, we are in a situation where the 9-year-old student, to gain access to a picture that he drew a picture of a dog and saved it on his OneDrive. He needs to have a company-owned, fully compliant, behind MFA device to be able to look at the picture of the dog. At the same time, the administrators can go sit in the public library and wipe out the whole tenant from any device they want. There's like something so twisted in these. We have these like privileged access management, privileged access workstations, correct use of privileges. Like all these concepts are like totally lost again.
So let's loop back on some of the concepts that actually have been a bit twisted and lost over time. So one of the things I mentioned in the introduction was things like security feature bypass. That's, gone up. It's not to anywhere near the levels of the other vulnerabilities there, but we're actually seeing things that people have almost forgotten about. The mark of the web to protect files and mark them as internet downloaded content. And people, I think there's a lot of concepts within Windows that people have just got so complacent about, become to rely on AV engines. Other tools that are out there are still reading these things that can be manipulated by an attacker. What are your thoughts on the suitability of kind of the modern Windows OS landscape and some of these legacy things that people still rely on? UAC, Microsoft won't describe that as a security boundary, but a lot of people still believe it is one. What are the challenges you guys see out there in those legacy security controls that we're still often relying on?
It's a very common question is why do you need to get rid of admin? Why do I need to not be an admin because I have UAC? That is probably one of the most common things that I said. It doesn't take that much time to show them a single UAC bypass and make them believers. But I mean, that's a very common thing. So that's at least something. And it's actually Microsoft made a huge, that's a sad thing. Microsoft listens to customers occasionally. And this one was when we got rid of Vista, which was great. But when we moved to Windows 7, Microsoft relaxed the UAC settings, as Vista and Server 2008 still required you to answer every single prompt where you were trying to use your admin rights. And then in Windows 7 2008 R2, everyone complained so much that they took it down a notch when it comes to security by allowing anything that's built into the OS to bypass by default. And that's why we had insane amounts of UAC bypasses. So that's one of those examples for sure. And Defender is of course the first one. How do we kill the either just the AV engine or the actual EDR, for example. How do we kill them? So it's number one thing to do.
And on that kind of note around some of the challenges, I'm going to turn to Kip now, because you obviously CISO for a number of companies. You're in this area of advisory. And one of the things we've been trying to hammer home is vulnerability management programs, the importance of patching things. And then we've seen over the past 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, some challenges from some of the patches Microsoft have released in terms of the stability, in terms of whether they've actually covered the issues. We've seen third-party EDR vendors cause blue screens. And I'm actually seeing a lot of people now actually reluctant to be as aggressive with their patching programs, even if it exposes them to risk. How do you talk about that, managing your vulnerabilities landscape with customers?
There's no silver bullet that I'm aware of. First of all, let's just say that. And so then it really becomes kind of this dichotomy where on the one hand, you're pushing patches as fast as possible and you're accepting the risk that the patch is going to be no good and it's going to take you down. Or on the other hand, you're holding back. You want to wait till the patches are right before you push them. Either way, you're taking risk. And there's really not a great middle place that I've been able to find with my customers. And I work with all different sizes of companies. And it's really interesting because the giant enterprises struggle with this just as much as the mid-sized companies, as do the smaller companies. Now, there's different reasons for that. But I just want to say there's no silver bullet for this. But I will also add that, you should really think through which problem you'd rather have. Do you want the problem of, well, if I don't push the patches within that window, which is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? If I don't do that, then what's the risk that everything is going to get owned, right? Versus, okay, so I push the patch and I tip over a couple of boxes. That stinks, but maybe that's the problem I'd rather have, because at least I understand that problem and I can prepare for it and I can train my folks to deal with it when it comes in. So to me, I would say let's practice resilience, by pushing those patches a little faster than maybe you're comfortable with, and practicing the resilience and maybe doing some other things so that if a box tips over, whether it's a real box or a virtual box, that we're not going to mess anybody's day up too bad. Anyway, that's kind of the take that I've got on that.
Great take on it, because we've got that kind of CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if something's going to disrupt the availability, it's better that it's you as an organization being aggressive with the patching strategy than someone else who's ransomware the entire box. Sami, did you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I have my 2 cents on this. The first cent being that I've seen, and now it work a lot better, that if you have a company that's the size that has kind of someone actually being responsible for risk management, I tend to walk straight to them. So I give them options. You can prepare for a potential 2-hour downtime on your Windows servers, which is controlled by us. We have snapshots ready. We know when it happens. Or you can choose a 2 to 3 month downtime that is controlled by a third party. And if you talk to the risk management, it's really hard to find someone who would not take a controlled 2-hour downtime rather than an uncontrolled, potentially 2-3 month downtime. So that's one. And the other one is about ownership. So we have this, because I work a lot with OT environments and critical infrastructure like oil refineries. And we have a system. We have a diesel analyzer that has been running like 24/7 forever. This person who's been responsible for it for the last 25 to 30 years, and he protects it all. Like no one will patch that except over his dead body. Okay, he protects that because it's only about the uptime. So we have to first change when we ask them to commit to protect the system, we have to make them understand that protecting the system also nowadays includes the cyber side of things. And we have to find owners for these systems. I got a very good tip in another security conference for a Finnish colleague of mine, and he said that his biggest problem seems to be to find the owner. So when he goes into a customer, then he just says, like, we have a server here, and we have to find an owner for it. And we have to at least we have to understand the risk that we're taking by not patching it. So who's the owner? Well, there's no owner. And then he always, okay, I'm just going to shut the server down now because we can't take the risk. But no, you can't shut it down. Oh, we have an owner. Good. Because someone has to own these things. Otherwise, we can't make these ancient. I have customers that have old VMS servers that have been running now for 15 years without reboots. So I do understand this. Like Kip said, there's no silver bullet to this. We all understand. We're not trying to play better here and tell everyone that you can just reboot whenever needed. Business doesn't suffer. We all know this.
I love the 2 cents that you added, Sami, because I see that myself all the time, both of those things. The only other thing that I would like to add or emphasize is that even when you get everybody on the same page and everyone says, yes, this is how we're going to do vulnerability management, right? It's still hard.
I think, though, that part of the problem lies with the people running the vulnerability management programs. We have so operationalized vulnerability management. We've made it really a orderly, by-the-book pursuit where the subject matter expertise and the actual vulnerabilities, the very things covered in this report, has started to drop. And so what you're seeing is vulnerability management practitioners who can't be consultative on the necessity of patching for a specific vulnerability. They really don't understand the vulnerabilities at play. They understand how the vulnerability management platforms work, and they're unable to make that connection because we've made all the scoring about how we're succeeding, how we're failing on the vulnerability management aspect of it, or the detection of a vulnerability, rather than the goals. We're rewarding the means, not the end, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And we're not actually looking at patching. Okay, which patch is most important? Or really, we're going to go off CVSS? Don't get me started there. That's another webinar. Second, we're not looking at any kind of threat intel data to contextualize it. We're basically working in a box. And then third, you've got an individual that really doesn't understand the data they're working with. They understand the vulnerability management software, but they don't understand the vulnerability management. Those are 2 different things. And they're in charge of everything, and they're driving these owners to fix whatever. And so it isn't as simple as, do you want downtime from an attacker, or do you want downtime from a patch? Sometimes the answer is, I don't want either, because this vulnerability is never going to impact me whatsoever, while this vulnerability over here is really going to impact me and is incredibly important. But there's no one that understands that context enough to bring it to the company. And then that's why I think we need to step up our game when it comes to vulnerability management, patching, and all these things. We spent all this time researching vulnerabilities and no time researching patches.
I'm just going to jump in there because we'll start to run out of time here. Because like you say, we could just talk about CVSS scores and the difference between, I have this highly severe vulnerability in my environment. Is it even exploitable in my environment versus this lower severity one, which is definitely very exploitable in my environment? And as we talk about those organizational challenges we face, Paula, I know you've talked about the fact we've got this rising number of vulnerabilities, we've got increased cybersecurity spend. Are we actually spending money on the right things?
Yeah, I love this question. To be honest, I also ask it by myself to the customers. Are we actually leveraging what we pay for in a good way? Because yet again, we pay for CM solutions, and like there are so many customers, they use CMs, but for real, they don't have it armed with different rules, and they sometimes do not even put on the correct data sources. And one of the examples, there are many, of course, but that I've got in my mind right now is that we've been analyzing the incident of the customers from which data leaked. And how it leaked. Well, there was a project management portal that these credentials were taken over, and eventually hackers were pulling out the data from that portal. Yeah, so there was a source code, usernames, passwords, banking information, like all the stuff. But the problem was that in order to be sure that the data actually leaked, you need to get the log where you're going to see that these queries for that data, they've been made. So how do you know that? Well, from the project management logs. But then there's a problem because we've got only the data to the certain date. Why? Because the disk got full and nobody really replaced that. all right, so how do we correlate? And then we start to search for sources of information in the infrastructure that are simply unmanaged. So then we went to the proxy logs. Okay, great, we've got those. So let's correlate that. And then eventually we managed to figure out that there was like over 20,000 files that leaked. Okay, we get the list of the files, we classified them, we knew what kind of a data leaked, we contacted appropriate entities, blah, blah, blah. But just because of that, we had knowledge and comfort in an incident, but still to say, okay, this is the data that leaked over there. So do we leverage the solutions that we pay for today in an appropriate way? Definitely not. And cybersecurity got more expensive, and we spend already quite a lot of money on the cybersecurity solutions, and lots of companies complain on that and so on. But then we are not yet secure. Why not? Because maybe we should actually start looking into what we've got. And that's just like my first statement there. And the data sources are not connected to UCM. The threat hunting isn't done. In my opinion, it should be done once per month so that we build a hypothesis, we put on the imaginary problems over there, and then we try to find whether we got a possibility to respond to those. How do we trace identity in our organizations? Like, where does the attack start? Where does it end? Can we trace it? And that is, to me, when we do the investigations, well, absolutely crucial thing to even paint the full picture or half of the picture about what's going on. Without that, we are just blind, and we pay a lot and we are blind. It's just something is wrong over here. So I would totally recommend everybody to maybe, like, you can start with revising, okay, what kind of solutions we got, how can we maximize it, but then maybe let's start with a lower bar over there. Start to do the threat hunting every month. And then you're going to see lots of obstacles that you're going to have and that you will need to clear out on the way, so that when the incident happens, you're going to be like, yeah, we've done that. That's what we need. And that is the easy start to make. Like, what tools you got, what kind of information they bring you. Start the threat hunting right now and see how much we could have possibly.
I see so many organizations that are afraid to do a threat hunt. And, you know, that's like being afraid to go to the doctor for preventative medicine. That's one way to really end up sick. And I'm stunned by that. The threat hunt is probably the most underutilized aspect of security today that everyone should be engaged in. It's just a basic tenet of health, and it bothers me that that I see organizations failing to.
And it's not even expensive, right? It's not that tough to do, really. I mean,
you spend millions of dollars on software you don't use, but you won't engage in a threat hunt.
Oh yeah, and beyond kind of the threat hunt, the thing you talked on there is, you know, the preventative measures that you can take for your health. I think a lot of the things that, you know, you guys have all been highlighting in this around least privilege, around, you know, controlling what applications run in your environment, people see those as the go running, eat your vegetables of cybersecurity, right? It's not fun. Everyone wants the flashing new light, the AI powered system that's going to detect all the threats. But actually, there's a huge amount of proactive work that you can do that maybe doesn't initially seem like the fun, interesting thing to chase down, but actually goes a very long way. I mean, what are some of the key things, proactive controls that you guys see people not focusing on enough in their environments?
Allow listing. So, AKA used to be allowed to call whitelisting.
But Sami, that's hard.
Yeah, no, this is exactly this. That's the lazy man's option anywhere. It's like, you want to play whack-a-mole against 1 million pieces of malware found per day, or you want to list a single thing per week, let's say. It's always for me.
Yeah, I believe in application control, Sami. I really do. But it's hard. It's not easy yet. You know, has anybody on here seen kind of like a practical, you know, way to do it? Because I'd love to know.
I think if you combine it with the removal of local admin rights, so then you can trust the things in the Windows directory, the program files, the things that Intune is installing, because they have trusted ownership. The user doesn't have the ability. And then all you're doing is controlling the allow list of the things that the user is downloading. So they probably shouldn't be running uTorrent. They probably shouldn't be running these things. And you can start to actually have a much smaller thing rather than trying to get a hash of every file in the system. I think that's the way I've seen it succeed.
Yeah, just like to add, like the allow listing is one part, but then let's put the cherry on the top, which would be anti-exploitation. That's one part. And the second, I think that we don't leverage Windows Firewall in a way how it's supposed to be leveraged. Like, that is just like the biggest misconception of this world. There are a couple of, and that's one of them. And basically, why do we even allow the different processes to communicate out from the endpoints? Like, why PowerShell should go to the internet? Why? And it's so easy to block it. And then there are not that many processes that actually need network communication. We can list over here by all of us, and it's gotta be what, 20, 30 business apps that actually need to go to the internet. Like, why do we allow that? And the way, if you combine it with the allo listing and anti-exploitation, then beautiful. And you have a pretty inexpensive risk minimizing solution. And of course, we can add a lot of things on the top of that. But then there you go. So that we avoid the complaints or like, oh, we don't have a budget and so on. Like, just look in your house. You've got all of that there. Just minimize the risk.
So even more general level, forget the internal networks. I mean, I don't understand this. There's still this, we're in the internal network. This is secure. No, protect your endpoints exactly the same whether you're in the internal network or at Starbucks. Like, stop believing in this internal network segment, which is so secure.
It's so funny, Sami, because we talk about assume breach, zero trust, and yet we still try to hide behind our perimeters.
The perimeter's dead. But, more than anything, I think I see CISOs consistently letting perfection be the enemy of good. And they spend so much time and energy trying to get one thing perfect when they need to get 10 things to good. I'm not saying we can't try and get perfection eventually, but for the love of everything, please at least get to good. And we're spending way too much time on that top 10%. And a lot of it, I think, candidly has to do with compensation plans where people are incented to get to that excellence in a couple of areas. And I don't care how excellent you are in 5 areas. What I care is how good you are across the board. Because as an attacker, let's go back to how we started the call. I'm going to take the path of least resistance.
I'm like 100% agreeing with you on that. And I tell that to everyone. There's like 2 statements. One is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And the other one that I try to tell everyone is that you have to remember that your job is not to stop the enemy. Your job is to slow it down and make it an anomaly so that someone can detect it. Because as long as you think that you can stop them, you're skipping on all of the monitoring, recovery, and all that important parts when it comes to this layered approach in security. So stop trying to be perfect.
Yeah. Can I tell you my new catchphrase on that, Sami? Be hard to hack and fast to fix.
I like that. Yeah.
Because everybody's on the hard to hack bit, trying to be perfect. But it's like, nope, you got to be fast to fix because you're going to get hacked.
And I think Charles's point kind of loops back to some of those things around people losing sight of why they're doing what they're doing with vulnerability management or with the security. I posted on LinkedIn recently, and it seemed to touch a nerve with a lot of people, the concept that some people, maybe because of their compensation plans, were very focused on a PAM, a vaulting solution, and getting all the domain admins into this vault and doing that. And that was their sole focus. Yet a misconfiguration in AD certificate services allowed anyone in the organization to become a domain admin. But that was outside of their blinkered view of, they weren't thinking of why we're doing this. They're thinking of it as a project that I just need to be excellent at vaulting all these accounts, not actually why am I thinking about those privileges there. I'm just going to quickly turn to some questions that we've had sent through. And I'm going to start off actually, Charles, I'm going to pick on you first because you mentioned the dreaded AI words earlier in this debate. And one of the questions talks about in the report, we've actually started to call out some vulnerabilities around Copilot. There was some server-side request forgery leading to information disclosure. And the question was, how do organizations actually mitigate potential AI vulnerabilities? How should they be thinking about those?
I'll answer 2 questions there. How are they and how should they? So we do a lot of AI testing for our clients. And as of yet, we haven't done a single exercise without a major finding. I mean, it's wild, wild west. And one of one of the disadvantages, or one of the advantages from a commercial sense, disadvantages from a security sense, is AI is incredibly easy and cheap to deploy. And what that does is it removes one of the Darwinistic gatekeepers we've had in security, which is in order for somebody to do something insanely stupid, they have to first get budget. And that enabled the security team to get in and say, no, wait, bad idea, Jeans. And the problem is that you've removed that step because it's cheaper to do it, which means the security team only hears about it when it's deployed. And so what are the key things? I mean, this goes back to just basic hygiene, things like test, plan, map it out, do tabletops, understand what you're doing. These are the basic gates I think we're missing. And I think if we get to the basic hygiene, we can start talking about what are really some of the advanced, thought processes in these AI deployments. But look, if you have an AI deployment right now and you haven't done security testing, it's time to pick up the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. It is like all the things we were talking about before. It is the next frontier that people are just racing into without thinking of all the lessons we've learned over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
We have handed really, really, really dangerous weapons to 2-year-olds.
Yeah. Okay, next one. I think this is a Sami question because it's kind of a Windows OS type one. So someone was asking, with the Microsoft implementing their Secure Futures initiative, some of the new administrator protection features that have been talked about in newer versions of the OS, what do you think is going to change the game in terms of protecting accounts, taking a least privilege approach? How is that going to actually impact the Microsoft ecosystem?
Well, first of all, there's two new very different kinds of features for Windows. So the admin protection feature itself, that is, as the name says, protecting admins. So it's just like UAC with a little bit more juice into it. Then we have the endpoint privilege management, which is supposed to allow users to operate things that require partial or complete admin privileges without compromising the whole system. So two different target groups. The other one is for admins and the other one is for end users. Now, I think we should concentrate on the fact that whatever features we get, end user is a different person than the admin, or a different kind of a role. So end users, even if we get more features, the new admin protection features are not meant to change the game so that an end user would suddenly be okay to be an admin. Because that's like shadow IT to the maximum. It's like every end user, is it okay for every end user suddenly to become the IT department? No, they're different roles.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it sounds very promising, but actually when you start to dig into it, we don't want to suddenly start granting more privileges just because there's a feature that's been enabled. We've actually got a good grasp on controlling those today, and that isn't going to fundamentally change it. Although it is welcome to see us starting to shift away and add, you say, some juice to UAC at least, because if we are going to be stuck with it, it might as well be juiced up a little bit. That doesn't hurt. Okay, let's have a look. Kip, there's one here. So someone said that they are spearheading a new endpoint risk management sub-team strategy within their organization because they've noticed a gap in that they don't have a dedicated focus on endpoint risk, oversight into the new AI app portfolio, patching, vulnerability management, and group policy Intune policy review. So that's covering quite a lot of different disciplines there. They said this is more of an oversight of endpoint security risks, so they're not actually part of the security incident response team. And their question is, how can they get the most value out of that for their organization? What should they be focusing their efforts on in terms of endpoint risk management?
Well, I think the biggest risk on the endpoint is phishing. We can't be there every single time a strange link shows up and somebody thinks about clicking it. So we have to do everything we can to not only use technology to help us, keep the inboxes, clean of those kinds of things, But I think we also need to up our game in terms of teaching people how to deal with that stuff, because phishing at the end of the day really is not an attack on our technology. It's an attack on our lizard brain, right? It's designed to freak us out emotionally and put us into an altered state where we do stuff that in our right mind we would never do. And I love that phrase, in our right mind, because the amygdala is our fight, flight, or freeze, like really ancient lizard brain. And so that's what all this phishing is really about, is it's trying to, alter the way that I look at things and get me to do dumb stuff. And so anything we can do there is going to probably give us a better return on investment than, kind of continuing to tweak and tune the stuff that we are already trying. Because if the stuff we were already trying was really markedly bringing down the endpoint risk, then I don't think this question would be coming up. So maybe not the answer they were expecting, but that's, I think, the reality of the endpoint is we have to put more energy into the human aspect of defending against phishing attacks.
I'll just add to that as well. I'm going to give them an answer that they probably also don't expect. We've talked a lot about identity as the perimeter. We had this, the network used to be everything we talked about as the perimeter, then it was the endpoint, and now we talk about the identity. And actually, to your point around phishing, we can do great things with users and training, and we can do things on endpoints. If they're using a personal device and they fall for an adversary in the middle, evil jinx attack, the session gets hijacked, then actually you need to start looking at the identity level, the blast radius of that account if it's compromised. Similarly with the endpoint, if you're just looking at what they can do on an endpoint, you're missing the bigger picture. And I would suggest starting to align around identity and a more holistic view of endpoints, of cloud, of on-prem, of OT, just to see where it goes.
That kind of brings us back full circle to, the comment that I opened up with, which was elevation of privilege, right? If I can get that foothold on the endpoint, now I have a launching pad to elevate my privileges somehow. So, what can we do to keep that initial foothold from taking place, both in terms of technical controls, but also people things? What kind of people things can we do if we can do there? And listen, I didn't go into cybersecurity because I wanted to spend all day talking to people. I didn't. So I get it. We'd rather just, turn our ones and zeros on and off and, job done. But that's just not the way things work.
I'm surprised you started a podcast there, Kip. And let's finally...
Well, yeah, see, I didn't start in cybersecurity to talk to other people, but I figured out that if I didn't, I wouldn't be that successful. Yeah, because I was finding myself screaming at a wall in a room all by myself going, this is crazy. I either need to change the way I do this or I need to find something else to do.
I will throw the final question over to you, Paula. So with record numbers of vulnerabilities this year, someone's basically saying that they feel completely overwhelmed with just keeping up, because it's not just, as they point out, it's not just the Microsoft vulnerabilities that are out there. There's a whole ecosystem of ever-increasing vulnerabilities. They want to know, has anyone got any advice for how they prioritize what they patch, how they prioritize their vulnerability, so that they're actually dealing with in an efficient way, so they're not having to play whack-a-mole with 40,000 vulnerabilities a year?
Question is, should they? Because that's basically what Charles mentioned during our conversation. Like, do we actually prioritize the patching? But at the same time, why don't we, for example, just put the weight on the resilience and then figure things out? What kind of in general globally state we're going to achieve when we're going to roll the patches out, of course, with the appropriate testing, or maybe that's not necessary in the different spheres, depends on the situation. So in general, of course, in a larger environment where we've got a more critical solutions and there is a critical vulnerability, then that definitely should be our priority. But we should really think about the baseline over there, because to me, when there is a vulnerability, like for example, recently there is a very interesting vulnerability within the SMB that has been not really long time ago released. Yeah, so actually 14 days. So there we go. When we think about this, then do we have the strategy on responding to that before it even appears? Because when we look into the ways of how we are able to exploit things, and I like to really go deeply into the different components of the operating system and think that exploitation, like that's going to be, for example, done that way, this way, that way. But it's not like, we're not discovering a new outer space over there. Like the exploitation is actually from A to Z. And then eventually within this space, we are moving in. And then, of course, we are playing all the colors and so on. But then if we do have anti-exploitation, if we do have the allow listing and all the solutions that we basically mentioned over there, then we are minimizing the risk to the point where that priorities aren't really that important. Yeah. So then only the highest priorities become super high, but then we totally mitigate and cut off all the noise, because even though things would be potentially vulnerable, our solutions, they are designed to actually minimize that risk. So that's kind of like my perspective on that. So let's make it first for us, the environment where we keep the bar high for hackers. And then let's, with the full awareness, start prioritizing what kind of things we should patch first. Because otherwise, that's going to become a crazy hunting game. Like, okay, what do I do? What's the highest priority? Oh no, I forgot about that solution. There's that. And I mean, how does the project management, like a spreadsheet, looks for that? That might have like a couple of sheets and then a lot of colors, and then probably there's a huge mess inside. Like I don't want to be having that in my mind. So it's easier to protect and prevent in general than mitigate things later.
Exactly like allow listing and deny listing. I mean, it is easier to proactively protect against this as well. And we've been working with this report that we're now talking about for about a decade. We can go back in history and just look at how many of those years there have been at least around 60% of all these vulnerabilities being mitigated by not being an admin.
One part, and also like using the reference as well that we made here for health, and very well said, Sami, like if we wouldn't care about our health at all for our whole life, and then suddenly at the edge of X, we are like, okay, time to set up the priorities. Then what will be our priority? I don't know, go to a dentist maybe? Or like maybe just do the blood check? Like what should I do first? Because I cannot do things at the same time. So it's kind of that. And it's very hard to prioritize things in the environment that could potentially be already messed up. So from the bottom, we think about, okay, how do we design the prevention, and then we apply the priorities, unless something is like a really high priority then. Okay.
And that is a fantastic note for us to end on there as we're about out of time. And I think, just to quickly recap, I think it's really easy in this industry and reading these reports to get sucked into a world of fear, uncertainty, and doubt when it comes to cybersecurity. But a key message that we've heard from the panel today has been there's a lot of proactive things you can do. You can go out there, you can go beyond just timely patching. Actually, there's a lot of things out there you can do to really reduce your risk exposure, and security hygiene, such as applying the principle of least privilege, that defense in-depth strategy. Those things remain hugely important and a really effective way to reduce overall risk. We've heard identity mentioned quite a lot today. There's a really important part there about taking an informed view of the identity attack surface in terms of the privilege, the access of your identities, not just on endpoints, not just in the Microsoft ecosystem, but all the applications, all the cloud systems, all the things that they can touch upon. And to put that very simply, if your SIM tells you an identity has been compromised, do you know what the blast radius is from all the paths to privilege that compromised identity has? And just to end on it, as the report opens up with, there are few things in life that are certain except for death, taxes, and software vulnerabilities. And while the vulnerabilities themselves are inevitable, the breach and the severity of the breach doesn't have to be a foregone conclusion. So hopefully some of the insights shared today will help you all better protect your organizations. A big thanks to our panel and all the attendees for joining us today. I'm sure we could have spent another hour discussing CVSS as well as many other topics that are out there. So really appreciate you spending the time with us today. Sorry we didn't get a chance to cover all the questions I know people have sent through in advance. We'll try and reply to as many of them as possible offline. If you haven't had a chance to read the report yet, it will be available on BeyondTrust.com. and you'll be receiving links to it as well as access to this recording in a follow-up email. And if you're interested in learning more about identity security threats, privilege access management, or just want some practical advice on ways to reduce your identity security risk, check out beyondtrust.com/resources. You'll find a range of blogs, educational events, videos, and much more. And last but not least, a big thanks to the team at BeyondTrust who annually pull this report together, crunch the numbers, and give us this fantastic content to talk about. And the experts here who've not only joined us on the webinar today, but also weighed in with their opinion in the report itself. I'm James Maude. Thank you very much for listening, and stay safe out there.